The iron collar chafed against Ilara's skin, the weight of it nothing compared to the burden of betrayal that had placed it there. Rain fell like tears upon the auction platform, washing away the mud, but not the shame. Only yesterday, she had been a merchant's daughter. Today, she was merchandise with a price tag. Her stepmother's final words still echoed in her ears. "You were never truly one of us." What Ilara couldn't understand was the strange way the gathered nobles watched her, with curiosity rather than the usual disdain reserved for human servants. And when the hooded figure appeared at the back of the crowd, his amber eyes finding hers through the downpour, something ancient and primal stirred within her blood, something that had slumbered for 19 years, waiting for this moment of recognition. The Alpha King of the Northern Territories should have no interest in a common human girl. Yet as his voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd, bidding an impossible sum for her purchase, Ilara felt the first tremors of a destiny she never knew was hers. A destiny written in blood and scent, in secrets and sacrifice, a truth her mother had died to protect. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. The iron collar around Ilara's neck felt heavier with each passing hour. It wasn't the weight of the metal that bore down on her. It was the shame. Rain pelted the wooden platform where she stood alongside 5 other unfortunate souls, all awaiting their turn on the auction block. The gathered crowd huddled beneath umbrellas and overhangs, their eyes cold and calculating as they assessed the merchandise. That's what she was now. Merchandise. No longer a daughter, no longer a person with hopes and dreams, just something to be bought and sold. "Next up," the auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the marketplace square despite the downpour. "Female, 19 years of age, human, in good health, can read and write, experienced in household duties." Ilara kept her gaze fixed on the muddy ground beneath her bare feet. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as the guard yanked her forward by the chain attached to her collar. The sudden movement sent water droplets flying from her soaked brown hair. "Bidding starts at 20 silver coins," the auctioneer announced. The silence that followed made Ilara's heart sink further. Not even worth 20 silver. She risked a glance upward through her lashes, taking in the disinterested faces of the crowd. Most were turning away, seeking more valuable investments. 15 silver, then. The auctioneer tried again, his voice losing its enthusiasm. A heavy-set man in the front row raised his hand. 10. 10 silver from Master Barden. The auctioneer nodded. "Do I hear 11? Nothing. 10 silver going once." Ilara's stomach twisted. She'd heard stories about Master Barden's household. The servants there rarely lasted more than a few months before they were replaced. Those who returned to the market bore marks that couldn't be explained by simple clumsiness. 10 silver going twice. A flash of lightning illuminated the square, followed almost immediately by a thunderous boom that shook the wooden platform beneath her feet. Several people jumped, and a few hurried away, seeking better shelter from the intensifying storm. 100 gold. The voice cut through the patter of rain like a knife. Deep and commanding, it silenced the entire marketplace in an instant. Ilara's head snapped up before she could stop herself, her eyes searching for the source of the bid. Standing at the back of the crowd was a tall figure wrapped in a dark cloak. Though his face was partially obscured by a hood, Ilara could make out a strong jawline and piercing eyes that seemed to glow amber, even in the gloom of the stormy day. The auctioneer stuttered. "Oh, 100 gold from King Alaric," someone whispered, the name spreading through the crowd like wildfire. The Alpha King. Ilara felt her breath catch in her throat. The Alpha King of the Northern Territories rarely showed himself in public, let alone at a common servant auction in a border town. What business could he possibly have here? And why would he pay 100 gold, an outrageous sum, for someone like her? 100 gold going once, the auctioneer said quickly, not wanting to give the king a chance to reconsider. Going twice. Sold. To His Majesty, King Alaric. The guards wasted no time in removing her from the platform, roughly guiding her through the crowd that parted like water before a ship's bow. As they approached the cloaked figure, Ilara felt an inexplicable sensation wash over her, a tingling awareness that raised goosebumps along her arms, despite the warmth of the summer rain. When they reached him, the king's attendants stepped forward to handle the transaction, but the Alpha himself moved closer to Ilara. He circled her once, slowly, like a predator assessing its prey. Then he stopped directly before her, close enough that she could smell the subtle scent of pine and mountain air that clung to him. "Look at me," he commanded softly. Alara hesitated. Servants were never supposed to make direct eye contact with nobility, let alone royalty. But something in his tone compelled her to obey. Slowly, she raised her gaze to meet his. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a flash of recognition, followed by something that looked strangely like pain. Then his expression hardened once more, becoming the impassive mask of a ruler. "Your name," he demanded. "Alara, Your Majesty." Her voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Alara," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "You will come with me to the Northern Palace." It wasn't a question or an invitation. It was a statement of fact, as immutable as the mountains that bordered his kingdom. One of his attendants approached, holding out a cloak. "Shall I have her cleaned and properly dressed before the journey, Your Majesty?" "No," the king replied, his eyes never leaving Alara's face. "We leave immediately." The guard removed her iron collar, replacing it with a much lighter silver chain that connected to a bracelet rather than a neck restraint. Small mercies, Alara thought bitterly. As they led her toward a waiting carriage, Alara caught sight of her stepsister Cordelia in the crowd, her face a mask of shock and something else. Fear? The sight sent a chill down Alara's spine. What could make Cordelia afraid of this situation? If anything, her stepsister should be pleased that her plan to be rid of Alara had succeeded so spectacularly. Just 3 days ago, Alara had been the daughter of a respected merchant. True, he had died 5 years earlier, leaving her at the mercy of her stepmother and stepsisters, but she had still been a free person with a name and a position, however lowly. Then she had overheard something she shouldn't have, a conversation between her stepmother and a mysterious visitor discussing shipments and territories that clearly involved illegal activities. The next morning, falsified documents accusing her of theft had appeared, and by sunset, she had been stripped of her family name and sold to the local authorities to repay her debts. Her stepfamily had orchestrated her downfall with frightening efficiency, and now, somehow, she had caught the attention of the most powerful shifter in the Northern Territories. The king's carriage was imposing, black wood with silver fittings, and the royal crest emblazoned on the door. 6 massive horses stood ready in their harnesses, their breath creating small clouds in the rainy air. Before Alara could be guided inside, King Alaric grasped her chin with surprising gentleness, tilting her face toward the now clearing sky. The rain had stopped, and weak sunlight broke through the clouds. "You're sent," he murmured, so quietly that only she could hear. "It's impossible." Alara frowned in confusion. What was he talking about? She probably smelled of sweat and fear and the filth of the holding cells where she'd been kept before the auction. "Your Majesty, we should depart if we wish to reach the mountain pass before nightfall," an advisor urged. The king released her chin and stepped back, his expression once more unreadable. "Get in," he ordered. As Alara climbed into the carriage, she caught one last glimpse of her stepsister in the crowd. Cordelia was speaking urgently to a hooded figure at her side. The stranger turned slightly, and Alara caught a flash of cold blue eyes before the carriage door closed, sealing her fate. The journey to the Northern Palace would take 3 days, she had heard. 3 days to contemplate why the Alpha King had paid a fortune for a human servant girl. 3 days to wonder why he had looked at her with such intensity. 3 days to fear what awaited her in the frozen north. As the carriage lurched forward, Alara gazed out the small window at the town that had been her home for all 19 years of her life. She would likely never see it again. A single tear slid down her cheek, but she wiped it away quickly. Tears were a luxury she could no longer afford. Across from her, the Alpha King watched her with those unsettling amber eyes, his expression giving nothing away. But in the confines of the carriage, his scent was stronger. Pine, mountain air, and something wild and primal that made her heart race. And underneath it all, something strangely familiar that she couldn't quite place. "Why me?" she finally dared to ask, her voice barely audible over the clatter of hooves and wheels. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, as the town disappeared behind them, and the vast wilderness of the Northern Territories stretched out ahead, he spoke a single word that made no sense to her at all. "Mine." The carriage journey proved even more grueling than Alara had anticipated. 3 days became 5 as summer storms flooded the lower mountain passes, forcing their convoy to take longer, more circuitous routes. 5 days of tense silence, punctuated only by the Alpha King's occasional terse commands to his guards, or brief inquiries about her comfort that seemed oddly at odds with her status as a purchased servant. 5 days during which Alara felt his amber gaze constantly upon her, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. On the morning of the 6th day, as they crested a steep mountain path, Alara caught her first glimpse of the northern palace. Unlike the stone fortresses of human kingdoms, this structure seemed to have been carved directly from the mountain itself, a sprawling compound of dark granite and ice-blue crystal that glittered in the morning sun like a massive crown atop the craggy peak. The ancestral home of the Blackclaw pack, King Alaric said, breaking the silence as he noted her awestruck expression. Built by the first Alpha King 5 centuries ago. It's beautiful, Alara whispered before she could stop herself. The king's lips quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Yes, though most humans find it intimidating. Alara said nothing more, recognizing the implied question in his statement. Why wasn't she afraid? The truth was, she was terrified, but not of the palace. Her fear centered entirely on the enigmatic ruler sitting across from her, with his penetrating gaze and cryptic statements. As they approached the massive gates, Alara noticed the guards positioned along the walls, all shifters, judging by their imposing builds and alert postures. They straightened to attention as the royal carriage passed, but Alara didn't miss the curious glances cast her way, nor did she miss the way some of them sniffed the air subtly as the carriage rolled by. The courtyard beyond the gates bustled with activity, servants, guards, and what appeared to be noble visitors or advisors moving purposefully about their business. All movement ceased, however, when the king's carriage came to a halt. A tall, severe-looking woman with silver-streaked black hair approached as the king stepped down from the carriage. She wore a formal black dress with the royal insignia embroidered at the collar, marking her as someone of high position within the household. "Your Majesty," she greeted with a deep bow. "We weren't expecting your return for another week." "Change of plans, Lady Freya," the king replied. He turned and extended a hand toward the carriage, his eyes finding Alara. "Come." Alara hesitated only briefly before accepting his outstretched hand and descending from the carriage. The moment her feet touched the courtyard stones, a ripple of murmurs passed through the gathered crowd. She felt dozens of eyes on her, and the distinct sensation of being scented by multiple shifters at once made her shiver. Lady Freya's eyes widened as she looked at Alara, her nostrils flaring slightly. "Your Majesty," she said carefully. "Who is this?" "This is Alara," the king said, his tone making it clear he would provide no further explanation in public. "She will be staying in the East Wing. Have quarters prepared immediately." "The East Wing?" Lady Freya repeated, unable to keep the shock from her voice. "But that's— Did I stutter, Lady Freya?" King Alaric's voice dropped dangerously low, a subtle growl underlying his words. The woman paled. "No, Your Majesty. At once." She snapped her fingers and several servants hurried forward. "Prepare the blue suite in the East Wing," she ordered, then turned to Alara. "Come with me, girl. You'll need to be made presentable before—" "No." The king's command halted everyone. "I will escort her myself." This pronouncement sent another wave of whispers through the courtyard. Lady Freya looked as though she'd been slapped. "As you wish, Your Majesty," she replied stiffly. The king's hand settled at the small of Alara's back, guiding her forward. The touch, though light, sent an inexplicable warmth spreading through her body. She kept her eyes downcast as they entered the palace, acutely aware of the stairs that followed them. The interior of the northern palace was even more impressive than its exterior. Soaring ceilings, massive fireplaces, intricate tapestries depicting what Alara assumed were significant events in shifter history. Everything spoke of age, power, and tradition. As they walked, Alara became aware of a subtle change in the air, a thinning of the busy atmosphere of the main halls, as King Alaric led her down a quieter corridor. The decor here was different, less formal, more personal. The walls were lined with paintings rather than tapestries, and the floors were covered with plush carpets rather than the polished stone of the main halls. "The East Wing," the king explained, seeming to sense her curiosity, "houses the royal family's private quarters." Alara nearly stumbled. "Private? But I'm a servant. Surely I should be housed with the other." "You are not a servant." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "But you purchased me at the auction," she reminded him, confusion evident in her tone. The king stopped abruptly, turning to face her. This close, Alara could see flecks of gold in his amber eyes, and the subtle tension in his strong jaw. "I purchased your freedom," he corrected. "Not your servitude." Before she could process this statement, he continued walking, leaving her no choice but to follow. They passed several ornate doors, before stopping at one carved with a delicate pattern of winter roses. "These will be your quarters," he said, pushing the door open. Alara stepped inside and gasped. The room, no, suite, was larger than her stepmother's entire house, dominated by a massive four-poster bed draped in blue and silver silks. It featured a sitting area with plush chairs before a fireplace, a writing desk beneath a large window overlooking the mountains, and doors leading to what she presumed were additional rooms. "This can't be for me," she protested weakly. The king watched her with that same intense expression he'd worn since the auction. "It is. Through there," he gestured to one of the doors, "you'll find a bathing chamber. The other door leads to a dressing room. Lady Freya will send attendants with suitable clothing and anything else you might require." Alara turned slowly, taking in the luxury surrounding her. Nothing made sense. Why would the Alpha King purchase a human at auction only to treat her like an honored guest? Why house her in the royal family's private wing? Why look at her as though he knew her? "Why?" she finally asked, voicing the question that had haunted her for 6 days. "Why did you bring me here? What do you want from me?" For a moment, something like vulnerability flickered across the king's face, so brief she might have imagined it. "Rest," he said, avoiding her question. "Refresh yourself. We will dine together this evening, and then we will talk." Before she could press further, he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam. Left alone, Alara sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind racing. None of this made sense. The Alpha King himself had purchased her at auction, brought her to his palace, installed her in a suite fit for nobility, and now wanted to dine with her? There had to be some mistake, or worse, some hidden agenda she couldn't yet see. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. At her hesitant, "Enter," 2 young women stepped inside, both carrying stacks of clothing in various boxes. "I'm Mira," said the taller of the 2, a pretty girl with auburn hair and freckles. "This is Lena. Lady Freya sent us to help you prepare for dinner with His Majesty." Lena, small and dark-haired, offered a shy smile. "We've brought some clothes that should fit you, my lady." "I'm not a lady," Alara corrected automatically. What was she exactly? Not a servant, according to the king, but certainly not a noble. "We've prepared a bath for you," Mira continued smoothly, ignoring Alara's confusion. "If you'll follow me." The bathing chamber was a marvel of luxury. A sunken tub large enough for 4 people, filled with steaming, scented water. Ornate bottles of oils and soaps lined a shelf along one wall, and plush towels were stacked nearby. As the 2 attendants helped her undress, Alara noticed their subtle sniffing, the shifter habit of scenting to gather information. "Is something wrong?" she asked as Lena's nose wrinkled slightly. The girl flushed. "No, miss. It's just, your scent is unusual," Mira finished for her. "Most humans have a simpler smell. Yours is more complex. Almost like—" She stopped abruptly, exchanging a glance with Lena. "Almost like what?" Alara pressed. "It's not our place to say," Mira replied diplomatically. "Please, enjoy your bath. We'll lay out your clothes for this evening." As Alara sank into the warm water, she pondered this new puzzle. First the king's fixation on her scent, and now these attendants finding it unusual. What could possibly be strange about how she smelled? She was just an ordinary human woman, wasn't she? By the time she emerged from the bath, the attendants had laid out an evening gown of deep blue silk that shimmered in the fading afternoon light. It was the finest garment Alara had ever seen, let alone worn. "I can't possibly wear this," she protested. "It's too fine for someone like me." "His Majesty was quite specific," Mira insisted. "He wanted you to have this particular gown." As they helped her dress, styled her hair, and even applied subtle cosmetics to enhance her features, Alara caught glimpses of herself in the mirror. With each passing moment, the merchant's daughter-turned-servant disappeared, replaced by a stranger who could have passed for nobility in any court in the land. When they finished, Alara hardly recognized herself. The gown fit as though it had been made for her, accentuating her slender figure while remaining tastefully modest. Her dark hair had been arranged in an elegant style that framed her face, highlighting her gray eyes and fair skin. "Beautiful," Lena breathed, stepping back to admire their work. A knock at the door heralded the arrival of a royal guard, come to escort her to dinner. As Alara followed him through the winding corridors of the palace, her mind whirled with questions and possibilities. By the time they reached a set of double doors that the guard identified as the king's private dining room, her heart was pounding so loudly she was certain everyone in the palace could hear it. The doors swung open, revealing a surprisingly intimate setting, a small table set for two before a crackling fire, with candles providing warm, golden illumination. And there, standing by the window overlooking the twilight mountains, was King Alaric. He had changed from his traveling clothes into formal attire that accentuated his powerful build, a midnight blue tunic embroidered with silver, black trousers, and polished boots. His dark hair, freed from the confines of his travel hood, fell to his shoulders in waves that framed his strong features. When he turned and saw her, his eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, he seemed at a loss for words. "You look," he began, then paused as if searching for the right term. Familiar. Of all the things he might have said, this was perhaps the most confusing. Before Alara could question him, however, he gestured to the table. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." As she took her seat across from him, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that this dinner would change the course of her life even more dramatically than the auction had. Whatever the Alpha King wanted from her, she would discover it tonight, for better or worse. She only hoped she was prepared for the truth. The dinner began in silence, broken only by the gentle clink of silverware against fine porcelain and the occasional pop from the fire. Servants appeared at regular intervals, bringing course after course of exquisite food, many dishes Alara had never seen before, let alone tasted. The king ate sparingly, his attention seemingly more focused on watching her reactions than on his own meal. "You're not eating much," Alara finally observed, unable to bear the scrutiny any longer. "I find myself more hungry for answers than food," he replied, setting down his fork. "As I suspect, are you?" Alara nodded cautiously. "You promised explanations." "So I did." King Alaric signaled to the servants, who immediately cleared the remaining dishes and departed, closing the doors behind them. Once they were alone, he rose and moved to a sideboard, returning with 2 crystal glasses and a decanter of amber liquid. "Honey mead," he explained, pouring a small amount into each glass. "Much milder than what most shifters prefer, but perhaps more to a human's taste." Alara accepted the offered glass but didn't drink immediately. "I'm not sure I understand what's happening here, Your Majesty. You purchased me at an auction, yet claim I'm not a servant. You house me in your family's private wing, provide me with clothes fit for a noble, and now we dine together as though we're—" She trailed off, unsure how to characterize their situation. "As though we're equals?" he suggested, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Perhaps we are, in ways you don't yet understand." He rose, gesturing for her to follow him to the balcony doors. Outside, the night sky stretched vast and clear above the mountains, stars shining with a brilliance Alara had never witnessed in the lowlands. The moon hung full and heavy, bathing the landscape in silver light. "What do you know of your parents, Alara?" the king asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. "My father was Harold Thorne, a merchant. He married my stepmother, Vivian, after my mother died when I was young. I barely remember her." "And what was your mother's name?" Alara frowned. Lyra Thorne, though I believe her maiden name was Silverstone." At this, the king's eyes flashed with something that looked remarkably like triumph. "Silverstone," he repeated softly. "And she died when you were how old?" 4, maybe 5. Alara's frown deepened. "Why does this matter?" Instead of answering directly, the king opened the balcony doors and stepped outside, beckoning her to join him. The mountain air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow even in summer. "Look at the moon," he instructed. "Tell me what you feel." Puzzled but compliant, Alara gazed up at the full moon. At first, she felt nothing beyond the usual appreciation for its beauty. But then, as seconds stretched into a minute, a strange sensation began to build within her, a restlessness, a pulling, as though the moonlight itself were tugging at something buried deep inside. "I feel," she began, struggling to articulate the unfamiliar sensation. "Strange, Like something's trying to wake up? King Alaric nodded as though this confirmed something he already knew. Alara Silverstone was not human, he said quietly. She was a wolf shifter, one of the most powerful of her generation, and she did not die 19 years ago. The world seemed to tilt beneath Alara's feet. What? No, that's impossible. My mother died. My father told me— Your father told you what he believed to be true, the king interrupted gently. What Lyra wanted him to believe. I don't understand. Alara's voice trembled. Are you saying my mother abandoned us? That she's been alive all this time? No. The king's expression softened with something like compassion. Lyra Silverstone died 3 months ago, during an attack on a remote settlement in the far north. She had been living there under a different name for the past 15 years. Ilara's legs weakened, and she gripped the balcony railing for support. The king moved closer, his hand settling on her shoulder to steady her. Why? She whispered. Why would she leave us? Why pretend to be dead? To protect you. His hand moved from her shoulder to gently tilt her face upward, forcing her to meet his gaze. Lyra was not just any shifter, Ilara. She was my cousin, a member of the royal Blackclaw bloodline. The revelation hit Ilara like a physical blow. Royal bloodline? Her mother a shifter, and related to the Alpha King? It was too much to comprehend all at once. That's not possible, she insisted. I would know if I had shifter blood. I would be able to change, wouldn't I? Not necessarily. The king led her back inside as a chill wind began to blow. The ability to shift typically manifests during puberty, but it can be suppressed by trauma, by certain herbs, or deliberately by a parent wishing to hide a child's true nature. He guided her to a chair near the fire, his movements careful, as though she were something fragile that might shatter at any moment. 19 years ago, he continued, taking the seat opposite her, there was an attempted coup against my father, the previous Alpha King. The rebellion was led by a faction that believed the Blackclaw line had grown too tolerant of humans, too willing to pursue peace rather than dominance. Lyra, who had married a human merchant against the wishes of many in the pack, became a prime target. Ilara listened in stunned silence as King Alaric explained how her mother had faked her death and fled north, believing that by severing all ties to her old life, she could ensure the safety of both her human husband and her half-shifter daughter. She succeeded in disappearing completely, the king said, until 3 months ago, when she was identified by one of the rebels who had survived my father's purge. By then, I had succeeded my father as Alpha King, and I dispatched guards to bring her to safety. But we arrived too late. She's really dead, then, Ilara whispered, a strange grief welling up inside her, mourning a mother she had already mourned once before, yet somehow had never truly known. Yes, the king's voice softened, but before she died, she told my guards about you. She made them promise to find you, to bring you under the protection of the pack where you belong, where I belong. Ilara repeated, her voice hollow. I don't belong anywhere now. The life I knew was a lie, and the family I thought I had sold me like property. Your stepmother and stepsisters are not your family, King Alaric said, an edge of anger entering his voice. They never were. Your true family is here, with your mother's people, with the pack. He leaned forward, his amber eyes intense in the firelight. With me. Ilara shook her head, overwhelmed. You keep saying that, but I don't understand what it means. Even if what you say is true, even if I am half-shifter, why should that matter to you personally? Why would you go to the auction yourself? Why pay 100 gold for someone you'd never even met? The king was silent for a long moment, studying her face as though searching for something. Then he rose and moved to stand before the fire, his back to her. Scent is everything to shifters, he said finally. It tells us who is pack, who is stranger. It reveals emotions, intentions, health, and for some, for those lucky few of us who find them, it identifies our true mates. Ilara's breath caught. True mates? A rare bond, he explained, still facing the fire. Unbreakable, undeniable. When a shifter encounters their true mate, they recognize them instantly through scent alone. A suspicion began to form in Ilara's mind, one so impossible that she hardly dared voice it. And my scent. King Alaric turned to face her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had not yet seen. I caught it the moment I entered the marketplace, he said quietly. Even through the rain, even mixed with fear and dirt and despair. I would know it anywhere. It's been calling to me in my dreams for years. He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. His touch sent that same inexplicable warmth coursing through her veins. You are my true mate, Alara Silverstone, the other half of my soul, and I have been searching for you all my life. The declaration hung in the air between them, momentous and impossible to take back. Alara stared at him, her mind racing to process everything she had learned. This is too much, she whispered. Too fast. Yesterday I was a servant being sold at auction, and today you tell me I'm half-shifter royalty and your destined mate. How can I possibly believe all this? You feel it too, he said. Not a question but a statement of fact. The pull between us. The way your body responds to my touch. The way your heart races when I'm near. These are not coincidences, Alara. They are the signs of a true mate bond beginning to form. She couldn't deny the strange sensation she had experienced in his presence. The warmth, the awareness, the inexplicable feeling of recognition, despite having never met him before the auction. But to accept what he was saying would mean abandoning everything she had ever believed about herself and her life. Even if it's true, she said slowly. Even if I am your mate, I don't know you, and you don't know me. Not really, but I want to, he replied, his voice earnest. I want to know everything about you, Alara. Your hopes, your fears, your dreams. I want to give you the life you should have had all along, a life of safety and respect and belonging. He raised one hand to gently touch her cheek. I'm not asking you to accept everything at once. All I ask is that you stay, that you give yourself time to discover the truth of who you are and what we could be together. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted in the corridor outside. Raised voices, the sound of running feet. King Alaric was on his feet in an instant, positioning himself between Alara and the door, just as it burst open to reveal Lady Freya, her face pale with urgency. Your Majesty, she gasped. Forgive the interruption, but there's been an attack at the northern border post. The rebels, they've returned. The king's expression darkened. Casualties? 3 guards dead, several wounded. The attackers left a message. Lady Freya hesitated, her eyes flicking briefly to Alara. They say they know about the Silverstone heir. They're coming for her. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. The rebels who had targeted her mother were now hunting her. King Alaric's response was immediate and decisive. Double the palace guard. No one enters or leaves without my direct approval. And assign a personal detail to Alara. She is not to be left unprotected for even a moment. Lady Freya nodded, then hesitated again. There's something else, Your Majesty. The guards captured one of the attackers. He claims to have information about a traitor within the palace walls, someone who has been feeding information to the rebels. A traitor? The king's voice had dropped to a dangerous growl. Bring the prisoner to the interrogation chamber. I will question him myself. As Lady Freya hurried away to carry out his orders, King Alaric turned back to Alara, his expression grave. I must deal with this, he said. Guards will escort you back to your quarters and remain outside your door. Do not leave for any reason until I come for you. Do you understand? Alara nodded numbly, still processing the revelation that her very existence had put people in danger, that there were those who would kill to prevent a half-human from being connected to the royal bloodline. As promised, guards appeared to escort her back to her suite. Just before she left the dining room, King Alaric caught her hand. I will protect you, he vowed, his eyes burning with intensity. With my life, if necessary. No harm will come to you while I draw breath. The fierce protectiveness in his voice should have been reassuring. Instead, it sent a chill down Alara's spine, because for the first time since her arrival at the Northern Palace, she was confronted with the reality of the Alpha King's world, a world of power struggles, ancient hatreds, and blood feuds, a world she had unwittingly stepped into, and one she might not survive. Sleep eluded Alara that night, despite the luxurious comfort of her new chambers. Every creak of the ancient palace, every whisper of wind against the windows had her sitting bolt upright, heart hammering against her ribs. The guards stationed outside her door were meant to be reassuring, but their presence only reinforced the reality of the danger she now faced. By dawn, she had given up on rest entirely. She stood at the window, watching as the first pale fingers of light crept over the distant mountains, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of gold and rose. The northern territory was breathtakingly beautiful, wild and untamed in a way the southern lowlands could never be. In another lifetime, under different circumstances, she might have found peace here. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. When she called for the visitor to enter, Mira appeared, carrying a tray laden with breakfast. "Good morning, my lady." The auburn-haired attendant greeted her, setting the tray on a small table near the fire. "His Majesty thought you might prefer to breakfast in your rooms this morning." "Thank you," Alara replied, though food was the furthest thing from her mind. Is there any news about what happened last night?" Mira hesitated, clearly torn between discretion and the desire to be helpful. "The palace is unsettled," she admitted finally. "Many of the guards were up all night, and there's been constant movement between the North Tower and the King's quarters." The North Tower, Alara had learned from her brief orientation, housed both the military command center and the interrogation chambers. The prisoner was likely still being questioned. "And the king?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "Is he well?" A knowing look crossed Mira's face. "His Majesty is quite resilient, my lady, though I understand he had very little rest." She busied herself arranging the breakfast dishes before adding, "He asked me to inform you that he will call on you personally once matters are settled." After Mira departed, Alara picked at the food without much appetite. Her mind kept returning to the revelations of the previous night. Half-shifter, royal bloodline, true mate to the Alpha King. Each concept alone was overwhelming. Together, they threatened to crush her beneath their weight. And now, there were rebels hunting her, a mysterious traitor within the palace, and the certainty that her mere existence had already cost lives. Hours passed with excruciating slowness. Alara tried to distract herself by exploring her suite more thoroughly, examining the books on the shelves, many written in a language she couldn't read, presumably the ancient tongue of the shifter clans, and studying the paintings that adorned the walls. One in particular caught her attention, a portrait of a woman with striking silver-blonde hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was something hauntingly familiar about her features, something that resonated deep within Alara's soul. She was beautiful, wasn't she? Alara whirled around to find King Alaric standing in the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. She hadn't heard him enter, hadn't even heard a knock, a reminder of how silently shifters could move when they chose. "Who was she?" Alara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Lyra Silverstone." The king moved to stand beside her, his gaze fixed on the portrait. "Your mother. This was painted shortly before she disappeared, before she met your father and chose a different path." Alara studied the painting more closely, searching for herself in the elegant features, the proud bearing. "We don't look much alike. You have her eyes," he said softly, "and her spirit, I think. She was fierce, determined, uncompromising in her beliefs, even when those beliefs put her at odds with the rest of the pack." He fell silent for a moment, lost in memory, before turning to face her directly. "I owe you an apology for last night. I had hoped to give you time to adjust, to come to terms with your heritage at your own pace. Instead, you were thrust into the middle of a conflict that has been brewing for decades." "What happened with the prisoner?" Alara asked. "Did he reveal who the traitor is?" A shadow crossed the king's face. "He took his own life before we could extract that information. A poison capsule hidden in a false tooth. He bit down on it the moment we began to make progress. So, we still don't know who's been feeding information to the rebels." "No, which means we must proceed with extreme caution." He gestured for her to join him near the fire, where comfortable chairs had been arranged for conversation. Once they were seated, he continued, "What I'm about to tell you must not leave this room. The fewer people who know the full truth, the safer you will be." Alara nodded, her stomach knotting with apprehension. "The rebels call themselves the Pure Blood Alliance," the king explained. "They believe that shifters should rule over humans, not coexist with them. They see any form of integration, trade agreements, peace treaties, mixed marriages, as a corruption of shifter superiority. And my mother's marriage to a human merchant was seen as a particularly egregious transgression, yes, especially given her royal blood." His expression darkened. "But it went beyond mere disapproval. The more radical elements of the alliance believed that allowing such unions would weaken the shifter bloodlines, eventually diluting our powers to nothing. They wanted to kill her," Alara realized. "To make an example of her. Yes, and when she disappeared, they turned their attention to my father, who had supported her choice. The coup attempt failed, But the alliance never truly disbanded. They simply went underground, gathering strength in the shadows. And now they're after me. Alara's voice was steady, despite the fear churning inside her. Because I represent exactly what they fear most. Human and shifter blood mixed together. King Alaric nodded grimly. You are a symbol, whether you choose to be or not. Your very existence challenges their worldview. And the fact that you are my true mate, that the Alpha King himself would bind his life to someone of mixed blood, is more than they can tolerate. What do we do? She asked simply. We fight, he replied without hesitation. We show them, and all who might support their cause, that the future of our kind lies in unity, not division. That strength comes in many forms, not just in the purity of bloodlines. There was such conviction in his voice, such unwavering certainty, that Alara found herself wanting to believe him, but doubt still gnawed at her. You speak as though I've already accepted this path, she said quietly, as though I've embraced being your mate, being part of this world. But I'm still trying to understand who I even am now. The king's expression softened. I know, and I promised you time, a promise I intend to keep, despite these new complications. He reached across the space between them, offering his hand. But I also need you to understand that you are in danger, Alara. Real, immediate danger. The safest place for you is by my side, where I can protect you. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand in his. The now familiar warmth spread up her arm, a sensation both comforting and unsettling. There's something else you should know, he continued, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. Something that may help you understand your heritage better. He rose, still holding her hand, and led her to a tall mirror mounted on the wall. Positioning her before it, he stood behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. Look at yourself, he instructed. Really look. Alara obeyed, studying her reflection. She saw what she had always seen, a young woman with dark hair, gray eyes, fair skin. Nothing remarkable, nothing that screamed shifter royalty. I don't, she began. Wait, he interrupted gently. Watch. His hands moved from her shoulders to cradle her face, his thumbs pressing lightly at her temples. At first, nothing happened. Then, gradually, Alara noticed a change, a subtle silvery glow seeming to emanate from within her skin, growing stronger by the second. But the most startling transformation was in her eyes. The gray she had known all her life was lightening, shifting to a luminous silver that seemed to capture and reflect the light in an almost supernatural way. What's happening? She whispered, unable to look away from her transformed reflection. I'm helping you access your shifter essence, the king explained, his voice low and soothing. It's been dormant, suppressed, but it's always been part of you. This is who you truly are, Alara. This is your birthright. The silver glow intensified, spreading throughout her body, and with it came a rush of sensations, heightened awareness, sharpened senses, a surge of strength flowing through her limbs. For a breathtaking moment, she felt invincible, connected to something ancient and powerful. Then, as the king slowly withdrew his hands, the glow faded, her eyes returning to their usual gray. But something had changed irrevocably within her. A door once closed now standing ajar, offering glimpses of possibilities she had never imagined. That was... Words failed her. Just the beginning, he assured her. With time and training, you can learn to access these abilities on your own. You may never shift fully into wolf form. Half-bloods rarely do. But you have other gifts. Enhanced strength, speed, healing, heightened senses, a connection to the natural world that humans can never experience. Alara turned to face him, her mind racing with questions. How did you do that? Make my shifter side? Wake up? The true mate bond, he explained. It creates a connection between us, a channel through which power can flow. My wolf recognizes yours, even if yours is still learning to recognize itself. Before she could ask more, a sharp knock interrupted them. The king's expression immediately shifted, the warmth in his eyes replaced by the alert vigilance of a ruler. Enter, he called. A guard appeared, bowing deeply. Forgive the intrusion, your majesty, but Lady Freya requests your immediate presence in the council chamber. The envoy from the Eastern Territories has arrived with urgent news. Tell her I'll be there shortly, the king replied. Once the guard had departed, he turned back to Alara. I must go. The Eastern Alpha would not send an envoy unless the matter was truly pressing. Of course, she said, trying to hide her disappointment. There was still so much she wanted to know, so many questions left unanswered. As if sensing her thoughts, he took her hand once more, pressing it to his lips in a gesture that sent a shiver down her spine. We will continue this conversation soon, he promised. In the meantime, I've arranged for you to have access to the Royal Library. There are texts there that may help you understand your heritage better. Histories of the Silverstone line, accounts of half-blood shifters who came before you. Thank you, she said sincerely. I would like that. He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually stern features. You're not a prisoner here, Alara. The guards are for your protection, not your confinement. You're free to explore the palace, to speak with the staff, to begin making this place your home. Just promise me you won't venture beyond the outer walls without an escort. I promise, she agreed readily, having no desire to face potential assassins alone. With a final lingering look, the king departed, leaving Alara to process everything that had just occurred. She turned back to the mirror, searching her reflection for any trace of the silver glow, the otherworldly eyes she had glimpsed moments ago. Though her appearance had returned to normal, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed, that she would never see herself quite the same way again. The Royal Library exceeded Alara's expectations in every way. 3 stories tall, with spiral staircases connecting the levels, it housed thousands of volumes on every conceivable subject. Windows spanning the entire height of the eastern wall filled the space with natural light, while comfortable reading nooks were tucked among the stacks. An elderly shifter named Thorn, who introduced himself as the royal librarian, guided her through the collection, showing her where to find the texts the king had mentioned. Despite his advanced age, his eyes were sharp and knowing as he studied her. You look like her, you know, he commented as he pulled a heavy tome from a high shelf. Not in coloring, perhaps, but in the set of your jaw, the way you hold yourself. Lyra always had that same determined look about her. You knew my mother? Alara asked eagerly. Since she was a pup, he confirmed with a sad smile. Taught her to read in this very library. She was always hungry for knowledge, always questioning the old ways. He handed her the book, his gnarled fingers lingering on the leather cover. She would be proud to see you here, standing tall despite everything that's happened. Alara settled into a quiet corner with the text Thorn had recommended. Histories of the Silverstone lineage, accounts of the treaty that had united the northern and eastern packs under Blackclaw rule, and most intriguingly, a slender volume entitled The Half-Blood Chronicles, which documented the lives and abilities of those born of mixed human and shifter parentage. Hours passed as she lost herself in these forgotten histories, these stories of her ancestors and others like her. Some half-bloods, she learned, had developed unique abilities beyond those of full shifters. Some could communicate with animals, others could heal with a touch, still others could see glimpses of the future. Most fascinating of all were the accounts of half-bloods who had found mates among full shifters. The true mate bond, it seemed, could bridge the gap between human and wolf in ways that defied explanation. She was so engrossed in her reading that she didn't notice the approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across her page. Looking up, she found not the king as she had half expected, but Lady Freya, her expression as severe as ever. His Majesty asked me to inform you that he has been unexpectedly delayed, the older woman said stiffly. The situation with the Eastern Territories is more complicated than anticipated, and requires his full attention. I understand, Alara replied, trying to mask her disappointment. Thank you for letting me know. Lady Freya seemed about to leave, then hesitated. You should be aware, she said, her voice lowered, that not everyone in the palace shares His Majesty's enthusiasm regarding your presence here. Alara closed her book slowly. Are you one of those people, Lady Freya? The woman's lips thinned. My personal feelings are irrelevant. I serve the Alpha King, and I serve the Pack. If he believes you are his true mate, then that is what you are, regardless of your human blood. But you have doubts, Alara pressed, sensing there was more the woman wasn't saying. Lady Freya glanced around, ensuring they were truly alone before responding. I knew your mother, girl. I knew her well. She was willful, reckless in her pursuit of what she wanted, heedless of the consequences her actions might have for others. You blame her for the rebellion, Alara realized, for the deaths that followed. I blame her for putting her own desires above the good of the Pack, Lady Freya corrected sharply, and now history threatens to repeat itself. The king risks everything, his throne, his life, the stability of the territories, for the daughter of the woman who nearly destroyed us once before. Before Alara could respond to this accusation, a commotion erupted at the library entrance, raised voices, the sound of running feet. Both women turned to see a guard burst through the doors, his face pale with urgency. "Lady Freya?" he gasped. "You must come quickly. There's been another attack, this time within the palace walls." "Where?" Lady Freya demanded, already moving toward the door. "The East Garden. 3 guards wounded, 1 critically. And—" The guard's eyes flicked briefly to Alara before returning to Lady Freya. "They left a message, written in blood on the garden wall." "What did it say?" Alara asked, though part of her already knew the answer. The guard hesitated, looking to Lady Freya for permission to speak. At her nod, he replied grimly, "Death to the half-blood. Death to all who shelter her." Lady Freya's expression hardened. "Come," she ordered Alara. "We're moving you to a more secure location immediately." As they hurried through the corridors, Alara couldn't help but notice the looks directed her way by the palace staff they passed. Some curious, some fearful, some openly hostile. Word had clearly spread about who she was and why the rebels were attacking. They had nearly reached the king's private wing when a figure stepped into their path, a young man with dark hair and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. Though he wore the uniform of the palace guard, something in his stance set alarm bells ringing in Alara's mind. "Captain Thane!" Lady Freya greeted him with obvious relief. "Good. You can escort the girl the rest of the way. I must join the king at the scene of the attack." "Of course, my lady," the man replied smoothly. "I'll see her safely to her chambers." As Lady Freya hurried away, Captain Thane gestured for Alara to follow him down a side corridor. "This way," he said. "There's a more direct route through the servants' passages." Alara hesitated, an inexplicable unease settling over her. "I thought my chambers were in the other direction." "This is a shortcut," he insisted, his tone hardening slightly. "Come, quickly. It isn't safe to linger in the open corridors." Still reluctant, Alara took a step forward and froze as a familiar scent reached her nostrils. It was subtle, barely detectable, but unmistakable now that her shifter senses had begun to awaken. The metallic tang of fresh blood, mixed with something chemical and bitter, the same scent she had noticed on the rebel prisoner when she'd glimpsed him being led to the North Tower. Captain Thane's hand moved to the hilt of his sword. "Now, girl," he growled, all pretense of courtesy abandoned. "Or I'll drag you there myself." Alara took a deliberate step backward. "You're the traitor," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You're working with the Pure Blood Alliance." His lips curved in a cold smile. "Clever little half-breed," he acknowledged, "but not clever enough." He lunged for her, drawing his sword in one fluid motion. Alara dodged, her newly awakened reflexes allowing her to sidestep his grab. She turned to flee back the way they had come, but he was faster, cutting off her escape. "There's nowhere to run," he taunted, advancing slowly. "No one to save you. The king is occupied with the distraction in the garden, and by the time he realizes the true danger, you'll be long gone, delivered to those who will ensure you never taint the royal bloodline." Alara backed away, her mind racing. She was no match for a trained warrior, especially one with the full strength and speed of a shifter, but she couldn't simply surrender to a fate that would likely end in her death. The corridor ended in a large window overlooking a courtyard 3 stories below. Beyond the courtyard lay the outer wall, and beyond that, the wilderness of the Northern Territories, miles of forest and mountain where a half-blood fugitive could disappear forever, or die trying. "The pure bloods will fail," she said, playing for time as she continued to retreat toward the window. "The king is stronger than you think. The pack is loyal to him." Thane laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Loyal. Half the royal council secretly supports our cause. They simply lack the courage to act openly. For now. But when we present them with your head, as proof of our commitment, they will rally to our banner." He was close now. Too close. His sword gleaming in the light filtering through the window. Alara felt the wall against her back, and knew she had run out of options. As Thane raised his sword for the strike that would incapacitate her, Alara made her choice. With a surge of desperate strength, she threw herself sideways, evading his blow, and hurled herself through the window. Glass shattered around her as she plummeted toward the courtyard below. Time seemed to slow as she fell, her mind oddly clear, despite the terror coursing through her veins. She thought of her mother, who had sacrificed everything to protect her, of her father, who had loved her even without knowing her true nature, of King Alaric, who had recognized her as his mate despite the complications her heritage presented. She thought of the silver glow that had awakened within her, the dormant power beginning to stir, and then, in the final moment before impact, something miraculous happened. The power that had been merely a glimmer before surged through her entire being, flooding her with strength and instinct she had never known she possessed. Her body twisted in midair, cat-like, and when she hit the ground, she rolled, dispersing the force of the impact in a way no ordinary human could have managed. Pain shot through her left ankle and right shoulder, but she was alive, battered but not broken. Behind her, Thane shouted in rage from the shattered window, already turning to race down to the courtyard and resume his pursuit. Alara forced herself to her feet, ignoring the shooting pain, and ran toward the outer wall. She had seconds at most before guards appeared, before Thane caught up to her. But how could she know which guards were loyal, and which might be traitors like him? As she reached the base of the wall, despair threatened to overwhelm her. It was too high to climb, especially in her injured state, and the gates were too distant, too well guarded. Then she noticed it, a small drainage tunnel at the base of the wall, partially concealed by overgrown bushes. It was narrow, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through, but it was her only chance. Dropping to her hands and knees, Alara crawled into the tunnel just as the sound of pursuing footsteps reached the courtyard. The passage was dark and damp, filled with stagnant water and the reek of decay, but she pressed on, ignoring the scrape of stone against her injuries, the claustrophobic press of the walls around her. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened onto a steep, rocky slope beyond the palace walls. Without hesitation, Alara began to descend, using trees and boulders for support as her injured ankle threatened to give way beneath her. She had no plan beyond immediate escape, no destination other than away. But as the palace receded behind her and the wilderness of the northern territories stretched out ahead, one thought crystallized with absolute clarity. She had to survive, not just for herself, but for all those who had sacrificed to protect her, and for the future that her existence represented, a future where humans and shifters could live as equals, where blood purity gave way to strength through unity. Night was falling by the time she reached the cover of the dense forest at the mountain's base. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and her thin library dress offered little protection against the bitter cold of the northern night. Soon, hypothermia would become as great a threat as her pursuers. Limping through the darkening forest, Alara searched desperately for shelter. A cave, a hollow tree, anything that might provide some protection from the elements. But the unfamiliar terrain offered no obvious refuge, and her strength was fading with each painful step. Then, through the trees ahead, she spotted a flicker of orange light. A campfire. Hope surged within her, quickly tempered by caution. Who would be camping in these woods, so close to the palace? Loyal subjects of the Alpha King, or enemies lying in wait? With no better options, Alara crept closer, moving as silently as her injuries would allow. As she approached, she caught the scent of roasting meat, heard the low murmur of voices. 2, perhaps 3 people gathered around the fire. She was about to retreat when a gust of wind carried their words to her enhanced hearing. Said she escaped through a tunnel in the wall, a gruff voice was saying. The traitor lost her trail in the forest. Good, replied a second voice, this one achingly familiar, though I would prefer to have confirmation of her safety. King Alaric. It was the king's voice, here in the forest, miles from his palace. Relief flooded through Alara with such force that her knees buckled. She stumbled forward, no longer concerned with stealth, drawn irresistibly toward the safety his presence promised. The conversation at the campfire ceased abruptly. In the sudden silence, Alara heard the distinctive sound of swords being drawn, of bodies tensing for combat. Who goes there? Challenged the gruff voice. Show yourself. Summoning the last of her strength, Alara stepped into the circle of firelight. It's me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's Alara. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then King Alaric was there, crossing the distance between them in 2 swift strides, gathering her into his arms with a gentleness that belied the fierce protectiveness in his expression. Alara, he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. I thought I'd lost you. And as she sank against him, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion and pain, Alara realized a profound truth. Here, in the arms of the Alpha King, her mate, her protector, her future, she had found where she truly belonged. Not in the grand palace with its political intrigues and ancient hatreds, not in the lowland town where she had grown up in ignorance of her heritage, but here, with him, forging a new path that honored both the human and shifter sides of her nature. "You found me," she murmured, as consciousness began to slip away. "You'll always find me." His arms tightened around her, his response rumbling through his chest and into her very bones. "Always, until my last breath." The last thing Alara saw before darkness claimed her was the silver glow beginning to emanate from her skin once more, echoed by an answering golden light in the Alpha King's eyes, the visible manifestation of a bond that transcended blood, transcended species, transcended the ancient prejudices that had nearly destroyed them both. A bond that would, in time, heal not just their hearts, but the fractured kingdom they were destined to rule together. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.